Will the House please come to order? In accordance with the provisions of Uniform Rule 51, I turn the gavel over to the President of the Senate, the Honorable Kathy Giessel.
I call this joint session to order. Will the Senate Secretary please call the roll of the Senate?
Senator Birch.
Here.
Birch, present. Senator Bishop.
Here.
Bishop, present. Senator Coghill.
Here.
Coghill, present. Senator Costello. Senator Gray Jackson. Here. Gray Jackson, present. Senator Hoffman.
Here.
Hoffman, present. Senator Hughes is excused. Senator Kawasaki.
Here.
Kawasaki, present. Senator Keel.
Here.
Keel, present. Senator Machuki is excused. Senator Olson.
Here.
Olson, present. Senator Reinhold. Senator Schauer. Senator Stedman.
Here.
Stedman, present. Senator Stevens.
Here.
Stevens, present. Senator Von Imhoff. Here. Von Imhoff, present. Senator Wielkowski.
Here.
Wielkowski, present. Senator Wilson is excused. Senator Begich.
Here.
Begich, present. Senator Giessel.
Here.
Giessel, present. The roll shows 14 members present.
Will the House members please indicate their presence by voting? Has any member failed to vote? Will the clerk please tally the board?
24 members present.
Mr. Senate Majority Leader.
Madam President, I move and ask unanimous consent that the vetoes on the Conference Committee substitute for sponsor substitute for House Bill 39 become law, notwithstanding the Governor's veto.
So the motion before the joint session is whether the House Bill 39, which is the operating budget, become law, notwithstanding the Governor's veto. Is there debate? Seeing no debate.
Brief at ease.
Brief at ease. Will the joint session please come back to order? So for clarification, this is a motion to determine whether the governor's vetoes on the operating budget should become law. So, brief at ease. A yes vote. Please come back to order. So this is to, that the House Bill 39, which is the operating budget, notwithstanding the governor's veto, would become law. So a yes vote is to override the governor's vetoes. A no vote is to uphold the governor's vetoes. So we're under debate. Representative Fields.
Thank you, Madam President. The vetoes that we confront today are extraordinary, and indeed they're unprecedented in our history as a state. They would inflict incredible pain, suffering, and even premature death on many Alaskans, not to mention economic devastation, as we've heard from independent economists. Alaskans testified to the legislature that these vetoes are, and I quote, evil and unconscionable. Our faith leaders and the AARP have told us very clearly, those who support these vetoes will have blood on their hands when seniors are cast out into the street, when Alaskans go without essential medical care, and when domestic violence survivors are turned away from shelter. Permission to read.
Permission granted.
This is a letter from approximately 12 faith leaders to us as legislators, and I quote, "These cuts will result in deaths. That is a fact that should be felt in your conscience. There is a direct line between your vote and these deaths." The letter continues, "You are the last chance to prevent widespread despair, abuse, and death. The choice is yours, and you will spend a lifetime, and it will spend a lifetime on your conscience." Ending reading. This veto override is indeed a choice between life and death for all too many Alaskans, and what is most extraordinary to me is that the governor would sacrifice Alaskans' health, jobs, and lives for policies that are not even fiscally conservative. The governor cannot claim that taking away preventative dental care will save money for the state. It will not save money to make seniors homeless or to starve them by eliminating senior benefits. It will not save money to shut down homeless services and cast hundreds of people into the streets in Anchorage. It will not save money to eliminate legal services for survivors of domestic violence when we know that more women and children being battered will only add costs to the state, not to mention the human suffering. It will not save money to eliminate the only law enforcement in some rural communities, leaving sexual predators to assault young children with impunity. It will not save money to defund addiction treatment, but will only increase costs as addicts steal from our homes and our vehicles. The governor's vetoes simply are sadistic. They inflict incredible pain, suffering, and premature death on untold Alaskans to achieve an ideological objective. Human life, not to mention our economy, must have a higher value than blind ideology. We must override these vetoes. Alaskans' jobs, our public safety, our economy, indeed, the lives of many of our neighbors are on the line. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Fields. Representative Hannan.
Thank you, Madam President. A budget frames what you want to do. It tells you where your priorities are. And the budget, as we proposed it, continued to put downward pressure on Alaska's operational costs. But these vetoes are not about balancing the budget. They are about redirecting Alaska to become something that I don't want Alaska to become. I grew up in an Alaska where first-generation college attendance was possible from even the poorest families because we had a strong university system, because we provided early childhood interventions that allowed working-class people to achieve greater ends, where a transportation system supported by the state of Alaska meant that small communities along our coast could develop small businesses and grow and thrive and continue on that great American dream. These cuts are not about balancing the budget. They are about making sure that Alaskans are living in fear and on the edge. And I urge you to not tolerate that, to take the brave and bold stance that leads us to a 21st century where Alaskans are safe in their homes because we've helped those in need, where we've taken care of ours who are suffering from mental illness or addiction or on the verge of homelessness or living and experiencing homelessness. That when we recognize those problems, we put our money where our problems are and we attempt to resolve them. We have the money to meet the needs to make Alaska prosper. And if we are truly open for business, we don't cut the Division of Agriculture. We don't dismiss a legislative idea like a hemp program for Alaska. We make sure those programs are there so new businesses can develop. And Alaska in the 21st century is not returned to a colonial status where we are a resource extraction only. We want Alaskans to stay here, we want them to thrive here, and we want Alaskans to be healthy and safe in their homes. The budget we passed did those things. I urge you to heed the call of the hundreds and thousands of Alaskans who are demanding from us to take the leadership and override the governor's vetoes. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Hannan. Representative Wool.
Thank you, Madam President. In my short time here, I've stood up and spoke about the university multiple times. The vetoes proposed by the governor are approximately $400 million. A third of that $400 million is a cut to the university, about $130 million, which is unprecedented, not only in the state of Alaska, but in the country, where a state government would cut their university by that much. It is going to eviscerate the university as we know it. I've stood and spoke many times in support of the university. They have made cuts year after year for many years. It's showing already. They're feeling these cuts already. People are leaving. Enrollment is down. We need to turn this around. I applaud the other body for adding money to the budget of the university this year, and that was the right direction to go. And this cut is so large, it's unimaginable what would happen. In our community of Fairbanks, the university is a major pillar of our community, not only economically, but culturally. People work there, people go to school there, it brings people there. So many people I've met in my time here in Juneau said, oh yeah, I used to live in Fairbanks, I went to school up there. It was a flagship campus of the university. This kind of cut, and this cut is only targeted at UAA and UAF, by the way. It is so large and is so, I don't understand the reasoning for it, and it's going to have detrimental effects on our state and our communities. The research that we're doing at UAF and UAA in the state of Alaska is world leading, and this kind of cut will turn that around and regress this institution that we have, that we need. Other industries right now are having a hard time. The university needs to be made stronger. This cut will devastate it and will send thousands of jobs and even more than that of people leaving here because they won't see a need to stay here. Their kids won't be able to go to school here. This school is affordable to Alaskans. Alaskans will send their kids outside. Many of them won't return. This cut is unconscionable, and I protest it with everything I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Wool. Senator von Imhoff.
Thank you. My political education, if you will, has been fast-tracked over these last 5 months. As many of you know, I am much more of a policy person than a political person. And it will not come as a shock to any of you that I am about facts and figures and rely on research and data to inform my decision-making, to reach rational, thoughtful solutions to problems. I am driven to find long-term, real solutions, not half measures just to survive to the next election. I cannot fathom why the governor is purposely throwing Alaska into a severe economic recession. It would be one thing if we didn't have the revenue, but we do. We have plenty of money. After the legislature spent 5 months creating a sensible and intelligent budget, we ended up with a $600 million surplus. The governor is cutting the budget not because we are in a fiscal crisis. It is to distribute nearly $2 billion to Alaskans, to the detriment of core government services like public safety, roads, and education, and in the process, putting the most vulnerable among us at risk. This is not the Alaska I grew up in. It is not the future I want for this great state. I may be a slow learner, but even I know that voting to give out a $3,000 permanent fund dividend is smart politics. But it is, without any doubt, really, really bad policy. If we had an affordable dividend, like between $1,500 to $1,600, which is well above the average of the last 40 years, we would be in much better financial shape. Here's the scary thing, Madam President, Speaker Edgman. I don't think anybody in the administration understands the full implications of all the vetoes and the fund sweeps. When we ask the governor, he says, "I'll get back to you." When we ask the commissioners for answers about specific reductions, we learned that the commissioners were instructed not to appear before Senate Finance, to just run their departments and let OMB handle the financial aspects of the state. When we ask OMB to present the impacts of the vetoes to Senate Finance, like we did yesterday. They tell us they are busy. Their apparent excuse was they are still analyzing the veto impacts. Unacceptable. What I can't understand is how we have arrived at this point after 7 months, and we in this body still cannot get real answers to real questions. The time for campaign rhetoric left this room a long time ago. Our future is on the line, and we cannot even get basic answers regarding the administration's analysis of the impacts of the huge reductions in state spending. Again, unacceptable. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that as an Alaskan, you receive a $3,000 dividend check this year. Well, you won't have a job if you work at the university, or in construction, or in any number of the nonprofits that serve homelessness shelters or abused women's shelters. You might not have access to dental coverage, or Head Start preschool for your kids, or assistance to pay for heating fuel, or any tuition money, or even an actual university to attend, for that matter. While you may not have a job, or a home, or heat, or medical care, you'll have $3,000 in your pocket. Better make it last, because that's all you're going to get. While this governor, or I believe this governor, needs to articulate his vision for the state, hopefully one that creates hope, inspiration, and confidence in our future. We need a governor who understands economics and finance, who understands how the private sector, the nonprofit sector, as well as the education sector all fit together to drive the engine of our economy. We need a governor that, when asked about a vision for jobs, education, and economic growth, she or he will give you a well-articulated strategic plan. We have 38 legislators in Juneau today. 22 are absent. The argument of the location, whether it be in Juneau or in Wasilla, is a diversion. It's a red herring to mask the real issues of what we are facing here today. Those issues are, number one, a lack of understanding of the real impact of the collective cuts, including the $200 million the legislature did, another $440 million the governor did with the vetoes, plus another $200 million in programming because the governor is going to drain the funds, like higher education, through the lack of a reverse sweep. Number two, a desire to pay a $3,000 dividend regardless of the devastating consequences and destruction to the state. And number three, ignoring the long-term economic effects to the total permanent fund value by taking excessive draws in the earnings reserve account in order to pay for a dividend. I am a true fiscal conservative, and I don't criticize our governor lightly. I believe in smaller government, controlled spending, a spending cap, and a balance between core government services and economic investments in the right areas. I use numbers and data. I talk to leaders in the community and learn their perspective. I listen and read hundreds of hours of public testimony. I want to fully understand the impact of our decisions so I don't destroy the lives of thousands of Alaskans in the process. And what I have learned, Madam President, Mr. Speaker, is that sometimes you have to spend money now in order to avoid paying much more money later. Mark my words. The vetoes the governor is making now, and that some legislators refuse to override, will bite us hard in the future by costing the state more money. When? Medicaid ER visits will increase as patient access to primary care is cut by well over $100 million. Crime will increase as homeless people will become desperate because they have nowhere else to go. Bright young minds will leave Alaska as they seek educational and job training opportunities outside of Alaska. This will force both government and private companies to pay to recruit employees to move to Alaska to work. Unemployment benefits are going to skyrocket because so many people will be out of work. There will be drug addicts on the street as over $6 million in behavioral health treatment and recovery grants have been vetoed. The list goes on. I'm almost done. To my fellow Alaskans, what kind of state do you want to live in? What kind of future do you want? I want one we can be all proud of. One based on a shared positive vision, constructed by hard work and cooperation and collaboration. That is what we are elected to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator von Imhoff. Senator Birch.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise in strong opposition to the vetoes that we're asked to consider today and urge a yes vote on an override. You know, we spent the last 5 or 6 months here in this building, in the Capitol building, in Juneau, working on a budget, on an operating budget. That operating budget involved the tiers, testimony, trials, tribulations, the participation, if you will, of Alaskans from across this state. It involved the administration. It involved, different organizations. It involved educators. It involved people from across Alaska who built a budget that is a solid budget. We know, it provided a $600 million surplus. It reduced spending statewide by about $200 million. Unprecedented. It's the smallest budget on a per capita basis in 15 years. A responsible budget. It passed out of the Senate, the other body, if you will, I guess in this room. It passed out of the Senate on a 20-0 vote. Unfortunately, there are only 14 of those 20 represented here today. Apparently, the balance of that number, the 6 that are not here, are not willing to stand up and defend their budget in front of these vetoes. And I think that's, I'm concerned about that. I think you need to stand up and protect your work. If it passed out of the Senate on a 20-0 vote, I'm here to say I defend my work over the past 6 months. I defend the budget that we presented. And again, I am a strong opposition to these vetoes and urge a yes on an override. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, and thank you, Senator Birch. Representative Josephson.
Thank you, Madam President, Mr. Speaker. I strongly oppose these vetoes, and I strongly support the motion before us to override the vetoes. I want to talk first about the only thing that I think, perhaps there's a second thing, that's good that's come from these vetoes. And I, like others, have been prone to watch the occasional cable news network, the one that I favor. And I can be vulnerable to tribalism like anybody else. But I've never been prouder to stand in a joint session. And I'm very proud today to be associated with my colleagues from the other body, from District M and C and B and N and S and R and P and L, and from those members of my own party. Mr. Speaker and Madam President, as other representatives and senators have noted, this is a wholly unnecessary and painful ordeal that this administration has put us through. It is, I have no idea how this governor could go to a meeting of the governors in the lower 48 and say, here's my predicament. We're the only state with no broad-based tax. We have unlimited resources, tremendous energy. We are called North to the Future for a reason. We want to give out at least, and I think there's got to be 59 or more votes in the legislature that supports this, $900. Everyone agrees the residual that is left. It is about a residual. I understand that. But we can find a responsible budget. And other governors would look at the problem. You don't have a. Why would you impose such harm? It's neat. This administration would send us to the dark ages in areas specifically of pre-K and the arts. We would not have those programs. Apparently, that the ignominy of not having those programs is nothing ashamed of. And we're going to the bottom and race to the bottom for Mississippi and Arkansas for those great states. This administration would do damage to behavioral benefits. In the me, I'll the Steve doctrine. You take Washington what you can get. That's what you do. You're not going to solve the $20 debt. That is not going to happen. But we're not dollars go to care. Our dollars. That's services, dental care. In crime, this governor won't be tough on crime, but he's cutting veto bill. He's prosecutors that fought. Goes on. University of Alaska. This is absolutely unacceptable. Governor say told you're going to suffer 100 people. Think about 1,300 people. What's it? Sewer 4,000 people. There's probably 13,000 sewers. It's the of sewer. Who does this? It's outrageous. Fund it. Local our foes, our partners. Cutting community assistance. Thank Tudor Road is a great problem. Everyone virtually is homeless. Conservative voters and many concerns keeping strong now. Administration, even if some you could quantify bottles, anxiety, and the administration cost us 13th. You could launch a rocket to Mars, and for what good? No good that I can identify. He also believes, I think cynically, that this is a state where it's you against me. It's not that state. And that's what people have written us. It's terribly, damaging, divisive, necessary. And also, I'll I start, that is, my colleague, thank you for
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Vetoes, if we understand, if we don't take action, devastating, devastating to devastating to kids, they'll be devastating who devastating poor, devastating to our teachers, to our economy, to our enforcement community, to our businesses, devastating to the state. We don't. Veto devastate kids' education cut funding, which every single source has a tremendous return, a return of 8 to 1. Every spend on pre-return dollars, kids are likely to graduate, likely to crime, less likely to be social assistance. That's cut budget. Into kids, cut fund of education, and this every single year, where our school districts all across the state are forced to lay off teachers, give pink slips to teachers, because they have no idea what sort of budget they're going to get from us. Because here we are in July, and we still have a budget. They have no idea of funding their own. This bill would completely gut our university system. These are allowed. In fact, we've heard will result in the closure of multiple campuses. Well, no, gone to many in the room have gone to university. Result tuition. We've just yesterday that the actions of the governor. Students are going to lose the performance scholarship. They're going to lose education grants. No longer program. By the way, 17 to 20 new doctors. There's no. This is why we have a program. Elders break promise that we have to our seniors by taking away benefits. I was here, a number of us were here taken when the promise that was made was we're going to take seniors, but we're provided, and that pulled out that who have relied on these promises say none of this is law. Oh, you guys are breaking. Guess what? Senior benefits is on the is being broken. Veto. Devastating to the working poor. Alaskan, just about every Alaskan is a car accident away from being on Medicaid. And this person takes away, this veto takes away tens of millions of dollars in Medicaid funding. It takes away, called and said, I was scheduled to get all, go this, and all of a sudden, we're that way to the people that funding. When we make promises to the people, we keep those promises. This bill, the veto, will be to our economy, devastating to our business community, and cause loss of jobs, state jobs. It'll plunge our fragile economy back in local property, hundreds of dollars shifted to, and by the way, Medicaid. Mad, in some cases, 9% provider is cut. Guess who that now agency, which has much higher costs. Those costs are passed on to Alaska form of insurance rate. The state of Alaska, every single community in this state. These vetoes will be devastating to rural Alaska because village public safety officers, millions of dollars safety will be cut. Power gone. Imagine you're living in rural Alaska and also that you're living in a community where you're paying $1 per 5, 7, 8, 10 times higher than what in Alaska on a promise made, and you're going to start facing a $1,000 energy bill every month. We've seen that in the past. There will be devastating effects in rural Alaska. I want to take a minute and just address some of the objections that I've heard, some of the rationale for why these vetoes should be supported, and some of the things I heard is that, well, it's just the governor keeping his promises. I don't remember on the campaign trail ever hearing the governor say, if I get elected, I'm going to cut education. I'm going to cut the university. I'm going to cut senior benefits. Just the opposite. He said just the opposite. He's on video in interviews saying, I will not cut education. I will not cut Medicaid. I will not cut the university. You can go watch it on TV. People talk about keeping the trust. This is all about breaking promises with these vetoes. I hear some people say, well, we can't afford this. And we've all seen the chart that's gone around that shows we're at the lowest per capita spending in the state since the 70s. We can always find efficiencies. But the question is, where do you find those efficiencies? Where do you make those cuts? And these vetoes cut from the poor, the sick, our seniors, our kids, basically anyone who can't afford to hire a lobbyist to come down here and lobby us. That's who was cut. Who wasn't cut? Some of the richest corporations in the history of the world. These vetoes don't take one penny from the oil industry, which made billions of dollars in profits in Alaska every year. In fact, the governor actively opposed cutting any of the $1.2 billion in oil tax credits that we're allowing. Tax credit deductions that his administration actively opposed. How much do we need to balance this budget and pay a full PFD? $1.2 billion, the exact same amount that we're allowing in oil tax credits. We can have both. We just have to make that political decision, and the governor does not do that with these vetoes. We should not be balancing our budget solely on the backs of those who can least afford it. We need to override these vetoes and protect our state from being devastated. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wielechowski. Representative Clayman.
Thank you, Madam President. Power. That's what we're really here about. Where is the power of the governor? And is this the two bodies of our legislature, are we going to exercise the power that we have under our Constitution to set a plan that makes sense to the legislature for a responsible way to manage our budget? The governor has not provided us with one. I'm not going to repeat many of the comments that we have already heard from our colleagues in both the Senate and the House. I just want to touch base on a few things, but I also want to touch base on matching funds, the federal matching funds. I had an occasion to visit with one of our senators from Washington in recent days, and as one would expect, Senator Sullivan did not take a strong position on the finer details of the challenges that we face today, but he did comment that one area that made sense that we should never lose sight of is to get every single federal matching dollar that we can. And so we went through and looked at the line item vetoes, and I still have questions about Medicaid matching funds and where that comes up, but the initial calculation showed that by not spending $10 million, we are losing at least $22 million in federal matching funds. And I agree with what my colleague from East Anchorage talks about, the so-called Stevens doctrine. I'm always struck when we look at different matching funds. I tell folks that if you want to get the 10% match for roads, it's pretty easy. There'll be people that will come in the Capitol, they will offer to shine your shoes, give you suggestions about a tie that looks nice with your suit, even invite you to dinner to get that 10% state funds, to get the 90% federal funds. But when we go and look at Medicare and Medicaid spending, there's not quite that same commitment to every state dollar we need to get every federal dollar possible. And now we look at the governor's vetoes, and it's the same thing. There's not that commitment to maximize the federal dollars, and all we're doing by that is we're hurting Alaskans. I look at the cut to the university, and when I look to the future and I think, where are we making the investment that will build a strong, diverse economy, that will help Alaskans have jobs, make people want to come here? And I look and I see communities like Seattle, Washington, Austin, Texas, the entire San Francisco Bay Area, the Boston area in Massachusetts. You look where technology is growing, where people are finding opportunities in the new economy, and again in tough times, those states, those communities say, we are investing in our universities, we are investing in education, because they know that education is our best investment for the future. That has been true since the founding days of this country. And to take this massive cut to the university not only damages the institutions today, but says we do not care about the future. We do not compare in building an economy for the future that works in the modern world. It says we don't care, and it suggests that somehow we'll rebuild it. The kinds of cuts, if these go through, it will not take 1 year, it will not take 5 years. It will take 10 or 20 years to rebuild the university from where it is today to where we would have to rebuild with these cuts that go through if this veto isn't overridden. So I can't say enough about overriding the university veto. Public safety is one of the greatest concerns that the public articulates again and again and again. We heard all the discussion about House or Senate bill, forgetting whether it's House bill or Senate, but the criminal justice bill that passed this session. Not a simple bill. It has a
discussions we've been having for years. How do we make wise use of our public safety resources? How do we improve public safety? And what we know by these vetoes cuts to prosecutors, cuts to VPSOs, cuts to the courts, that we will actually be harming public safety. So despite the governor's promises that he wants to see, he will not spare a dime to improve public safety, he's actually making cuts that will hurt public safety. And then a third area that it remains a concern to me, and no one has spoken about it, is the punitive cut to the court system, because the governor does not agree with the decision of the Supreme Court. At the core of the success of our democracy is respect for the three branches of government. On a personal level, I have been in front of the Alaska Supreme Court for clients, not in recent years. Sometimes I have won, and sometimes I have lost. Losing is a bitter disappointment. But I also know that if our institutions are to survive, we have to recognize that essential authority of the courts to tell us what the law is and what the Constitution is. And when we try to punish the courts for doing that, we disrespect ourselves. We disrespect the core institutions of government that make our democracy strong. And so the cut that the governor has made, because he disagrees with a series of decisions the Alaska Supreme Court has made over years, going back to the right to privacy that we first heard in the Raven decision about the right to privacy and marijuana, all those he doesn't like, and instead of accepting the authority of the court and recognizing the court decides and determines the meaning of the Constitution, he's trying to punish them for exercising their independence, and we should never stand for that. Even if we may personally disagree with some of those decisions, as some of us do, we must stand tall as a separate branch of government and recognize that the strength and independence of the judiciary is as important to the strength and independence of this body as it is to the strength and independence of the governor. But we must never surrender our power as a legislature, just as the courts should not surrender their power. Many years ago, not that many actually, I heard Chief Justice Roberts speak about big cases in the U.S. Supreme Court, and he commented that almost all of them have to do with the balance of power. When you really look at really what are the issues that are being debated, it's where's the executive power, where's the legislative power, and where's the court's power. That's what we're having today. We need a plan for the state. We need a fiscal plan, and what I see again and again is the governor has a single priority, and it is not a plan. That priority is $3,000 dividend, $3,000 dividend, $3,000 dividend. If you don't give me a $3,000 dividend, I care about nothing else. I don't care about the university system. I don't care about public safety. I don't care about the courts. I don't care about health and human services. I only want a $3,000 dividend. Madam President, this veto override is about power. The governor has a single priority. He does not have a plan. We need a responsible action plan for Alaska. A step towards that is to override these vetoes, and I would encourage everyone here today to please vote yes. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Representative Clayman. Representative Tuck.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, Mr. Speaker, we all have the same wants and desires. We want to be able to provide for our families. We want to make sure that we have safe communities. We want to make sure our children have a great education. We have adequate health care, and that we can retire with dignity without being a burden on society. But with these vetoes that we have in front of us, Alaska will never get there. It's impossible to make that happen. We need to be working to make Alaska a place where ideas and innovation flourish, education is the highest quality, and as a result, the economy thrives, and jobs are plentiful and rewarding. The budget the legislature passed and worked very hard collectively does that. It focuses on that. This budget invests in Alaskans. It invests in children. It invests in families. It invests in students from cradle to grave, because we also invest in seniors. It also invests in communities. It invests in public safety, from urban Alaska all the way out to rural Alaska. We're bringing it all together. And We do that with precision, protecting jobs and growing the economy. So therefore, I will be voting to override these vetoes. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Tuck. Senator Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Madam President. Speaker Edgman. As I stand on this floor today, like many of you, I've received thousands of emails in my inbox from Alaskans who are absolutely appalled by this governor's vetoes and actions. I share their dismay. I was truly moved by how many people shared their stories about what the collective spirit of Alaska has done for them. Stories of children that were molded by our public K-12 system to find what their passions are and how their passions grew from a spark to a roaring flame by our amazing teachers. From students who told us how much the public university system meant not only to them, but for their entire families, since many are first-generation college students. Stories about how folks in our most remote communities and urban communities alike are connected by our public broadcasting system. From seniors who fear their modest benefits will be gone by next month and are left to scramble to pick up the pieces. From Eric, who experiences homeless, but is doing his best to continue his education and find stable housing, all made possible by resources like Rural Cap and Safe Harbor Muldoon. And even stories from people like Bill, who's my constituent, who was tragically diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And he told me in no uncertain terms he would not be alive today without the publicly funded Medicaid program. All these services are threatened by this governor's actions. I can't even begin to comprehend why a so-called leader would want to jeopardize these efforts to take care of one another as Alaskans. When I arrived in this state 37 years ago in the early 80s, I fell in love with its promise and the sense of community that was so welcoming to newcomers. I was afforded the opportunity to work behind the scenes at the municipal level to help build the City of Anchorage infrastructure and energy grid. Years later, I was afforded the opportunity to run for office in order to continue that work and take a more hands-on role in shaping policies that make life better for members of my community. This was made possible by the promise and generosity that is so much a part of the soul of Alaska. We are now faced with a governor who is proposing policies that are simply an assault on everything we know and love about our state and what made it possible for our children and our families to thrive in our respective communities. In the spirit of continuing to shape our state and one that takes care of neighbors and the vulnerable. We have all received these thousands of emails from our constituents, organizations, and businesses imploring us to override the governor's veto. We must listen to our constituents, our friends, our neighbors, our families, our children, and do the right thing on behalf of the citizens of the state of Alaska. To override these horrific vetoes, it is not rocket science, folks. It's just not rocket science. In the words of many of our constituents who have said to us, I implore you to override these vetoes. Thank you, Madam President. Edgman, Speaker. Speaker Edgman.
Thank you, Senator Gray Jackson. Representative Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to start by thanking the over 3,000 Alaskans who have emailed me and all of us to override these vetoes. And I will be joining them and their call to override these vetoes today. I can't even keep track of the number in my email, how fast they come. As I sat in House Finance yesterday, I listened to many business advocates from across the state, from the largest to who represent the smallest businesses, saying override these vetoes for the economic impacts that it will have across Alaska. And when I got to my office this morning, there was a letter slid under my door. Permission to read?
Permission granted.
Thank you. The people of Alaska sent you to Juneau to find solutions. The Greater Fairbanks Chamber of Commerce urges you to work together across party lines and branches of government to find reasonable compromises on the current budget crisis. To be truly, quote, open for business, Alaska needs to continue the safe landing approach, cutting expenses gradually, and reducing the risk of job losses. Madam President, I agree with that. Madam President, many of the speakers today have agreed with that. We have cut this budget as one speaker from the previous speaker from the other body said, this is the smallest budget in 15 years. And I look around this room today, and we are working across party lines. There are Democrats and Republicans. We have members from every single region, every single corner of the state here today to override these vetoes, to vote to override these vetoes because of the impacts it will have on every single Alaskan and every single part of our state. We have to protect our economy as government, as elected officials. It is part of our job to make sure that we have a healthy and booming state today and long into the future. And the budget we wrote as the legislature, we did that. These vetoes, they don't do that from the highest level to the smallest level. There's 182 lines of vetoes. I'm not going to go through every one. But talking about how the cuts to the university would impact our economy also reminded me about how this is also a very minuscule and small cut that impacts Alaskans who are the most vulnerable. The average age of a homeless person in Alaska is under 10 years old. Excuse me. Let me drink water here. And back home in Fairbanks, I go to a lot of schools. I go to elementary schools, I go to high schools, I go to middle schools, and I look at the bulletin boards, and there's always announcements for events. There's announcements for sports games, for clubs meeting, for upcoming meetings that they have. But on every single one of these bulletin boards, in every single school and every single school facility that I go to, there's one that you always see. And it's a poster for the door. I'll make it through this, I swear. The door is the only homeless youth shelter in Fairbanks. There's not a lot of beds there for homeless youth, but it's the only opportunity that they have to go to a safer place, to get away from a dangerous home, to get away from an abusive home, to get away from a place that they're not welcome, that they have to love. They need that space to stay safe and off the streets. And on every one of these posters, there's those little tabs at the bottom that you tear off with their phone number. Every single one of these posters that I see, those tabs are almost always gone. These are needed by our students. These are needed by our homeless youth. And these cuts, the $7.2 million to the homeless grants and the community social services matching block grant, those cuts will shutter the door. It will shutter this one facility that we have to put our homeless youth in a safe place. The door called up the Department of Health and Social Services and said, can we lower our services that we provide? Can we lower our staff? Can we go to just an overnight facility? And this governor's administration said, no, you will not be able to get your certification. You will not be able to stay open if these cuts, which reduce half of their entire budget, $189,000 to them, would go away and they would have to shutter. Madam President, these vetoes, they don't make Alaska safer. They don't make Alaska smarter. And they don't make Alaska stronger economically. These vetoes hurt our businesses from our largest to our smallest. That's why I have this letter representing hundreds of businesses from Fairbanks. That's why we heard from the Alaska Banking Association. That's why we got a letter from AARP. That's why we got a letter from the Alaska Home Builders Association. That's why we've heard from bankers to brewers, from the youngest to the oldest, that these cuts are going to hurt our state at every single level, in every single region. When people I talk to about these votes, they say, well, we need to understand what government does. What is the role that government provides? These cuts don't do any of those roles, Madam President. These cuts don't make our economy stronger. These cuts don't make our state safer. If you want to provide to the most vulnerable, this doesn't do that. If you want to give out benefits to our largest economies, these cuts don't do that. If you need to cut our budget, as some others say, we have to reduce our budget as much as we can because we can't sustain this fiscally. We did that. I stand here with Republicans and Democrats, and I thank the co-chairs who worked so hard on those budgets for putting that one together that does protect Alaskans and does reduce the impact on our fiscal strain so that we can have a $600 million surplus. We've done those things. So I ask the members that are not here, and I ask the members today to override these vetoes and to protect Alaska in every facet of this state that we love. And that's why we're here today, and I thank everyone in this room for being here today and all of those emails. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Hopkins. Senator Hoffman.
Thank you, Madam President. I stand today in opposition of the vetoes. I've heard from my district Thousands of people have contacted my office, individuals, organizations, communities, and villages. And I stand here today to tell them that I'm going to represent them, and I'm going to vote for their interests and vote to override them. And I will be here to assure them that their vote is being counted today. I represent the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. I represent the Bristol Bay region. I represent the Alaska Peninsula. I represent the Aleutian Islands, and I represent the Pribilofs. I represent a region that spans approximately 1,000 miles, and I'll tell you today that their voice will be heard today. The vetoes that this governor has represented in his goal to try to streamline government are ill-advised. We have made over $1 billion, $100 billion in reductions already, and we continue to do so. But the pace that this governor is trying to accomplish his reductions are unfathomable to me and to the constituents that I represent. And it should be unfathomable to the rest of the state. And I think that that is an accurate statement. We've seen rallies across the state of Alaska, from Fairbanks, from Nome, to Anchorage. Yesterday we were here in Juneau, and in front of this Capitol there were thousands of people saying, don't listen to the governor, listen to the people that you represent. They are the ones that put you in office, and you alone must decide what is best for your people that voted you in and for your state. And that is why I stand here today, ready to vote for the people that sent me down here to vote on their behalf, to represent them for the services from education, public safety, power cost equalization, from the fish and game budget to public broadcasting. After this, if this veto were to be implemented, I don't know how many members, citizens that I represent, are going to get the message of what's happening in Juneau without public broadcasting, public radio. That one small, insignificant amount in the spectrum of the budget cuts is one that I feel that makes complete nonsense to keep people ill-informed on what's happening in the state of Alaska. Why should we say that we are going to be open and transparent and have the people, many people of Alaska, not be able to hear that voice, not to be able to hear that debate? This makes no sense. And I want to emphasize again that the people from my district, Senate District S, have sent me down here to represent them and represent their interests. And I will be voting no on a nonsense veto budget. All the items that are there collectively don't make sense. We've been streamlining government over the course of the last 6 to 8 years, and I think that we will continue to do so. But by using a chainsaw approach to try to address what is needed, and we couldn't even get a response from commissioners on what impacts many of these budget cuts will make. And until they do their homework and make their recommendations that make sense to me, I will not be supporting any reductions that this governor has presented to the people of Alaska. The people of Alaska are standing in uproar across the state like I've never seen it before. And their voices, along with the voices of Senate District S, need to be heard by the people. And that is why I stand here to represent their vote. And I appreciate them sending me down here to do the people's work, not the governor's work.
Thank you, Senator Hoffman. Representative Zolkowski.
Thank you, Madam President, Mr. Speaker. There are a lot of seasoned public officials in this room that have talked this morning about the impacts to our economy, the reduction in state spending that both bodies have worked on for the last several years. So I will not try to rehash some of those statements. Several weeks ago, I stood on this floor to describe the devastating harm communities in my district and around the state would feel as a result of these unprecedented cuts, but also the harm that would come if we made those cuts in an attempt to make a payment for a full permanent fund dividend. In my district, as the speaker who spoke before me, I represent the YK Delta region. That area has some of the highest costs of living in the state, as well, coupled with some of the lowest per capita income. So not only would it be the politically popular thing to do to vote for a full permanent fund dividend, my constituents need a full permanent fund dividend. But I want to echo the comments of that a friend of mine here in Juneau made, that she so eloquently stated in a video that went viral on social media and in the news. A budget is an elected official's love letter to our state. These types of, at the time, they were proposed budget cuts, but these types of vetoes, as she said, tell seniors, children, university students, working families, rural Alaskans, those struggling with homelessness and addiction, survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, and the most vulnerable of Alaskans, that we don't need you. When a state invests in itself, it tells the world that we believe in our future. It says our communities are an amazing place to live, an amazing place to learn, to work, to start a family, and build a business. What kind of statement would we be making when we gut funding for vital institutions and services that will cripple our economy and our ways of life? All for a one-time check that will not come close to offsetting the rise in power costs, the lack of travel and coverage for necessary health services, the loss of state scholarships, the loss of employment, and so many other things. I want to echo the sentiments of my colleague from District 17 in saying how proud I am to stand on this floor today alongside members of both bodies, of all political leanings, of all backgrounds, in telling Alaskans, we need you. We stand with you. We want safe, strong, healthy economies. We want you to live and work here. We care for you. We want you to invest here. It has been said that a budget is a moral document, and I find the budget vetoes totally unconscionable, as had been said earlier today. And I am very proud today to vote to override the governor's damaging vetoes.
Thank you, Representative Ziolkowski. Representative Sponholz.
President Giesel, Speaker Edgman, I rise in opposition to the vetoes, and I want to start by saying that I'm really disappointed that many of our colleagues aren't here today. I agree that the location of the session has become a red herring. It was a distraction. It was a bait and switch that has resulted in people not standing up for the people of Alaska. I think it's an excuse to fail to make a courageous decision. It's difficult to stand up to your party. It's difficult to stand up to your governor. But the cost to the state of Alaska is huge. These vetoes are reckless. They're irresponsible. The governor said, we haven't cut the budget enough. Well, we've cut $838 million in the 5 years preceding this year, and we cut another $200 million this year. That's over $1 billion in cuts. It's been said that this year's budget is the lowest in 15 years. Those are real cuts. There are real people across the state of Alaska that are impacted by these cuts. But we used a scalpel and not a chainsaw. I was referenced by one of our colleagues. Another $444 million this year on top of the approximately $200 million in cuts is just too much. And it's not just my opinion. We've heard from people at UAA, at ICER, the Anchorage Economic Development Corporation, the Anchorage Chamber, the Alaska Bankers Association, the Alaska Home Builders Association, hardly liberal organizations, that these cuts are reckless and irresponsible, that it's essentially creating a disaster for our economy. We'll set our state back decades if we do this, and we know because we've done this before. In the late 80s, we cut our budget really dramatically, and it took us so long to crawl out of that. These were the years of my teen years. I was a high schooler when this happened, and the cuts were devastating to our state. We saw 44,000 people leave the state and net out migration. We saw 10 banks go under in the state of Alaska. We were a much smaller state back then. That was huge, and it can be huge again. And I don't want that for the state of Alaska. I don't want it for 740,000 Alaskans, and I don't want it for my 3 daughters that I hope will raise their families in Alaska. We don't have to do this. We simply have to stand up and be courageous. The people of Alaska have been courageous. They have been rising up in a way that they never have before. I've received thousands of emails. We've all received hundreds of phone calls from people all across the state of Alaska. I've been receiving texts and phone calls and emails from people who are not political. These are not the usual suspects. These are not the people that show up in the gallery that frequently call us, that we know their names. They're people of all stripes. They are the woman who called the listening session that we had at the Anchorage Legislative Building last year, who receives senior benefits and is terrified that she's going to be hungry because she doesn't have senior benefits now this year because our governor said that that wasn't a priority. I'm sad because there's not enough people in this room. These override votes today are largely symbolic, and symbols matter, and so I think that it's important here for us to be here today. But I'm sad that there are a group of people who got distracted by the red herring, by the bait and switch that was put forth by our governor. The result essentially will be a human-made disaster unless we find a way to do better by Alaskans. I think it's important. It's an important symbol that we're all here today, and I'm proud to be here with you. I'm proud to be here with Republicans and Democrats and independents and senators and representatives. I think that the diversity of people in this room reflect how widespread the concern is about these vetoes. But we need more people in this room. We need another 22 people in this room. And it's my hope that we'll get there in the next few days. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Sponholz. Representative Tarr.
Thank you, Madam President and Mr. Speaker. Outrageous, devastation, painful, broken promises. One friend said that we should look at what's happening like it's a natural disaster has hit Alaska. And I just question if this is the best that we can do. And I reject the notion that it is the best that we can do. And I reject very strongly the way in which the governor has done this. And I just want to talk about a few of those examples. We've talked about the importance of the programs, and we've talked about the need for continued downward pressure, and we're going to continue to be more efficient, be more effective in the services that we deliver, and we share that goal. I know all of us share that goal. But for example, for the people who receive senior benefits, one day they received them, and then the next they found out they didn't. I mean, these are people that called into our Anchorage Town Hall, 88 years old. I don't know how you could look at yourself in the mirror and know that just one day, the few dollars that may be necessary for life-saving medicine, heat, or food, very essential items for life, you could just rip that right out from under someone with no warning at all. Does an 88-year-old have to go start flipping burgers? Is that the message from the governor? You should have lived within your means? Is that the message from the governor? I know from state employees we get to know through the work that we do, they're so hardworking. They're doing more with less because we have been cutting the budget for 5 years. I know state employees found out they lost their job from watching a press conference. That is not the best we can do. I don't care how many changes we have to make, we can do a better job than that. So these folks, totally unannounced, their life is in upheaval. They don't know where they're going to work. Can they afford their home? Just 6 days after this announcement was July 4th. Normally a day that people enjoy with their families. We celebrate the independence of our country. We think about the values we hold dear. Thousands of Alaskans spent their July 4th thinking about where they're going to live. Where should they find a job? Are the veto overrides going to come through? What about their kids' education? Maybe they have a kid with a special need whose needs have been met, but if there's 40 kids in a classroom, it's not going to happen. This is not the best we can do. It is not the best we can do for Alaskans. It's not the reason we took this job. I believe that about every single one of us. We want an Alaska where people thrive. We want an Alaska that is just a place that we love to live, and that is why we all live here. It is a place we love to live, and we want to have a future here. And so I reject these vetoes. They take us in the wrong direction. They cause damage, devastation, broken promises. They cause people to feel like they have no hope. But also, I reject strongly the way in which this governor would do it with a person who's not from Alaska, who's been here less than 7 months, who clearly does not have an investment in the future of our state. And I reject the notion that that is something that I want to be associated with in any way. To the seniors of Alaska, I would never do this to you. Never in a million years. To the kids of Alaska, I would never do this to you in a million years. Never rip the rug right out from under you. And to the hard-working state employees, if we have to make changes, we can do it in a thoughtful way that doesn't throw your whole family into upheaval and dramatically change your life. So please, to the people who aren't here today, join us. We can work together. You and I, Madam President, we've worked together on difficult issues. We have the power to do that. We have the will. There is a way. We need our colleagues to join us. We need to finish the work for the people of Alaska. I know in our heart that's what we all want to do. I believe that's what even the people who aren't here today want to do. But they need to join us so we can get our work done. And I look forward to that day. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Tarr. Representative Story.
Thank you, Madam President and Mr. Speaker. Alaska has experienced destructive earthquakes in its history, and I am sorry to say we are experiencing one now caused by our own governor. This man-made earthquake will injure thousands of Alaskans, many of whom do not have a voice. And this man-made earthquake is about to be followed by a huge aftershock if funding for student scholarships, power cost assistance in rural Alaska, and other critical services are swept off the table. This is not a way to make policy and budget decisions. Our budget is our values resourced. We are elected to prioritize what we believe to be essential to the common good, and we have done this. We have prioritized our seniors, early learning, K through 12 public education. Those children, they are our promise. They are the promise of Alaska. We have prioritized university funding for workforce development. We have prioritized people with disabilities, citizens who are currently homeless. We have prioritized public safety and thousands of jobs. We have studied the numbers. We've evaluated the consequences. We have heard from Alaskans across the state. We've spoken to people. We've received so many emails of people telling us they want to live in a state that values children, the arts, education, values a budget that's predictable, that gives stability to their business. As elected leaders, we know that the governor's unprecedented action is not the way to make change. I believe it is shaking the foundations of our economy and will severely damage the quality of life that makes Alaska, Alaska. We have a chance to stop this tidal wave of destruction. I want to talk about something that no one's mentioned, and it's a small thing in this veto, but it's a big thing to many communities. It's called Online with Libraries. I serve on the Education Committee. And this service provides, if Online with Libraries loses their grants from the state, they will lose internet service. And this is in Craig, Dillingham Public Libraries, Eagle, Gustavus, Hyder, McGrath, Nome. This is where they go to apply for jobs, to be in contact with others from outside. It is a way to make bank accounts, purchase airline tickets. There are things in this budget that are very important. It is so important that we override this budget. We have a chance, like I said, to stop this tidal wave of destruction. And I know we have the courage and Alaskans are counting on us to come together and to override this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Story. Senator Begich.
Thank you, Madam President, Mr. Speaker. The governor has a vision for Alaska, and it's not my vision. It's not the vision, I think, of the majority of Alaskans. It's certainly not the vision of a majority of the representatives of those Alaskans who are here today in this room. What is that vision? Listening to the comments I've heard earlier today, that vision is an Alaskan populace that's ill-informed. It's an Alaskan populace that's uneducated. It's an Alaskan populace that's unsafe. It's an Alaskan populace without opportunity. That's what the governor's vision for Alaska is. Cuts to early education alone condemn our youngest citizens to a future without opportunity. Today, some of you have suggested, some of the folks that have talked today, that there's some equivalency between the vote on the dividend and the governor's vision, but that's not true. This governor's vision has nothing to do with that dividend vote. These vetoes would stand whether you voted a $3,000 dividend or not. I know that from my conversation with the governor. He has no intention of stopping this approach to government. So don't be, for a moment, do not be misled by that. I believe some of our colleagues who've chosen to be somewhere else, Madam President, today, I believe they think that there's a compromise that's available here between these budget cuts and a dividend check. Whether we do or don't give a dividend check will be irrelevant to this governor. I believe that in my heart, and I believe it from my conversations with him. I want to add that this governor's vision for Alaska is somehow driven by a belief that we don't live within our means. We say that phrase all the time, but the truth of the matter is we could live within our means if we actually extracted our means appropriately. But he will not consider any single effort, no effort, to seek other approaches at income, other approaches that were mentioned earlier about oil and gas tax credits or other issues. And I bring that up because the governor has said our house is in ill repair and we must fix it. But what he means by that is we must shutter the house, board up the doors, and walk away from it. And that's not how I fix a house. I invest a little bit in that house so that that house can be the place I need it and want it to be. Like many people here, Madam President, Mr. Speaker, I received thousands of emails. And they weren't, as was said earlier, from the usual suspects, except for a small portion of them that were from the usual suspects. I received about 2% that supported these vetoes, and they were from the usual voices that send me usually nasty and mean-spirited emails. And that is not my vision of Alaska, Madam President. My vision of Alaska sits in this room right now. Republicans, Democrats, and independents that are standing side by side for this place, for this state, for this place we grew up in, that we live in, and that we plan to spend our lives in. I think many of our colleagues that are up north may feel that way too. I think they've been misled. This is my appeal to them, that this is where they should be today. They should be standing for Alaskans today. They should be in this room today. All the arguments that have been made, whether it's seniors, whether it's our rural residents, whether it's our younger residents, whether it's our working poor or our abject poor, whether it's those who have no medical services, we should be standing up for them. All of us should be. And 40 people here or 38 people here should be doing that right now on this vote. This budget's not an investment in Alaska. What this budget represents with these vetoes is a condemnation of Alaska. One speaker earlier said, we speak for the soul of Alaska. This budget is soulless. There is no soul in this budget. It's mean-spirited. It's game playing. I hate to think that some of our colleagues have abandoned Alaskans for folding tables in Wasilla. I don't believe it's in their heart. They know who will suffer for this budget. And when we vote today, this is it. There is very, very little likelihood that there will be some magical budget created that will then go to the governor and he will sign off on it. That is not going to happen, Madam President. That is not going to happen. We must stand for Alaska today. I will be voting to override these line item vetoes together because that's how we do business here. We do it as a collaborative, cooperative group that are standing tall. The real meaning of standing tall for Alaska. That's what we're doing now. So all of these folks behind me, Madam President, you, Mr. Speaker, you care about this state, and so do we. Today we're going to take a vote that shows that ability to fight for Alaskans. I close by saying, I hope that we will all have the courage to stand up for Alaska in the end. Today, we may be sending a message, but I hope all Alaskans hear it, that we believe in you and the future of this state. Please join me in voting to override these vetoes. Thank you, Madam President, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Begich. Representative Drummond.
Thank you, Madam President and Mr. Speaker. When I was elected in 2012 to represent my neighbors in House District 18, I took a good look at the map of my district. As a former 9-year Anchorage school board member, I focused first on, quote, my schools, my 5 brick and mortar schools within the boundaries of my district. Madam President, there are only 5 brick and mortar schools in my district that teach roughly 4,000 students. But my district has 17 school attendance zones that cross into and out of it. My district has several elementary schools and 2 other middle schools right outside its borders. I care about every single one of those schools and every single one of those students that attends those schools. In fact, as an Anchorage school board member, I cared about the more than 90 schools and programs that the Anchorage School District runs for its nearly 50,000 students. And I learned how much my colleagues across the state of Alaska, the 350 some odd school board members, care for every single one of the students in our communities. And I've never forgotten that lesson. When I came here as a House representative for House District 18 for the 17,500 people within the boundaries of my neighborhoods, I don't just represent those 17,500 people. I represent the 130,000 kindergarten through high school students that this state is obligated to teach, that show up every day in our over 500 schools around the state. I care about the schools in Abbott Loop, in Homer, in Healy, in Palmer, in Juneau, in Soldotna, in Kotzebue, in East Anchorage, in North Pole, in Nome, in downtown Juneau, in Mendenhall Valley, in Sitka, in in Turnagain, in North Pole, especially in North Pole. I'm sorry, I didn't think I would come into this meeting and bring up a laugh today, but I care about every one of those darn schools on behalf of those of our members who are not present in this room today. I would never dare to vote against something because it was not benefiting my schools, but it was benefiting somebody else's school. That's not the way we operate as statesmen and women to represent our communities. I care immensely about every single one of those 130,000 students in our K-12 system, as well as the thousands of 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds that will enter kindergartens all over Alaska in the next couple of years. This governor, Madam President, Mr. Speaker, is cutting nearly $7 million in state Head Start grants from dozens of small communities around our state. This $7 million cut means that $48 million in federal Head Start matching funds will not be coming to Alaska. The House Education Committee, or the House Education Budget Subcommittee, I forget which one, we heard very clearly this spring that all of those small, remote, and rural communities, as well as low-income communities in our urban districts, are unable to come up with that $7 million match that this governor is taking away from our very youngest citizens. We are going to lose more than $50 million in grants to educate our very youngest students. Thousands of 3- and 4-year-olds around Alaska will lose the opportunity to be better prepared to enter kindergarten. And as the member from the other body from East Anchorage reminded us, those kids will be far more likely to have trouble learning to read, will be poorly prepared to take full advantage of the so far uncut K-12 investment that we make in them when they enter kindergarten. And these kids will cost us more in the future when they don't learn to read. And because they don't learn to read, they will have trouble learning how to do math. They will not be able to read their science textbooks. And then what happens? They get advanced through school. They don't get that high school diploma. And you know where they're going to end up, and we're going to end up paying for it in much greater numbers than we are paying for them now. That $7 million investment in those 3- and 4-year-olds annually is going to cost us untold millions of dollars more in the future. Giving a $3,000 PFD to a kindergartner in Kayana or to a high school senior in Soldotna will not help them pay for a teacher to make sure there aren't too many kids in their classrooms so that none of them can learn. Never mind help get them prepared to enter college or a trade school or the workplace. And for that senior in Soldotna, I hope all of you paid attention to what we were told during the rally the other day, that a recent state teacher of the year, James Harris, is leaving the state, is leaving the Kenai Borough Peninsula School District because this is not an environment for excellence in teaching, and it's only going to get worse with these cuts. And giving a $3,000 PFD to a high school graduate about to enter college won't come close to replacing the scholarships or grants that the governor is also proposing to steal from our graduates. Madam President, Mr. Speaker, I know that's off topic, but it's lurking out there with more devastating news outside the budget in the so-called sweep. Madam President, Mr. Speaker, I care so much about every single child in Alaska, not just those in Spenard or Midtown Anchorage in my own district, but I care about the kids in Kotzebue, on Anchorage's hillside, the kids in Dillingham and Bristol Bay, in Bethel, in Kotzebue, in Healy, in Sutton, and in Mountain View, and in Bayshore, and Eagle River and Palmer, and Utqiagvik and Big Lake, in Sand Lake and Abbott Loop. I'm just sorry that my colleagues who represent so many of Alaska's schools are not present today. They're not present to vote on behalf of their schools, but I care about every single one of them, and I know every single one of you does too. And I will oppose these vetoes on behalf of every one of them. Madam President, there are many more cuts this governor is making that will limit broadband access, as my neighbor to the right said, and eliminate help with homework to thousands of students across the state. Not to mention all the cuts to health care, medical and dental and mental health care that will also hurt children. This governor is cutting access to the arts to people all over our state, and he's, quote, saving just $700,000, but causing the State Arts Council to lose millions of dollars in additional grants from private and public opportunities. There will be no more artists in the schools, residencies, bringing creative, working artists into the classrooms all over the state. Madam President, Mr. Speaker, I am so grateful for the hard work that all of our colleagues put into this budget, from the Budget Subcommittee members for Education that, yes, voted to keep the State Arts Council funded. Even our minority members voted to fund the State Arts Council. To the members of the finance committees of both bodies, and most especially to the co-chairs of both finance committees, who worked long and hard to achieve a compromise that we could all support. Madam President, Mr. Speaker, I could go on for a very long time, but I want to hear from as many of my other colleagues as possible. I absolutely oppose these vetoes and will be voting yes to override today.
Thank you, Representative Drummond. Representative Christ-Tompkins.
Thanks, Madam President and Mr. Speaker. I think this is mostly, as my colleague sitting behind me likes to say, for those listening in at home, and I think a lot of Alaskans are very interested in what is being said on the floor today. But for anybody who might be sitting on the fence, hopefully I can offer some persuasive arguments to nudge you in the right direction. And I have 3 points that are actually a little technical that I think are important to emphasize. The first is a lot of the speeches today, and I think a lot of the popular framing behind the governor's vetoes sort of juxtapose these cuts versus a $3,000 PFD as though it's one or the other. And that's a false equivalence, and that needs to be called out, and needs to be called out clearly and directly. Because the governor's $440 million or so of vetoes don't get you to a $3,000 PFD. They get you to a $1,500 or $1,600 PFD if you're going to have a balanced budget and you're not going to draw on savings. So the amount of carnage and devastation that the governor's actions will create don't get you a $3,000 PFD. And I think it should also be pointed out, given the governor's rhetoric, he has yet to present a plan that has mathematical integrity that gets you a $3,000 PFD. His budget proposal in February failed. It did not do it. It drew on savings. It cost shifted to local governments in a way that breaks the law and is basically fantastical and magical thinking. It didn't do it. He has yet to present a plan for a $3,000 PFD, and as we consider these budget vetoes today, we should not forget that this is not these vetoes versus a $3,000 PFD. These vetoes just get you incrementally about a third of the way there relative to the budget deficit that we have if you're going to have a $3,000 PFD. And by the way, they do that through potentially risking the accreditation of the University of Alaska, as recently reported. Moody's is looking at downgrading the credit rating of the University of Alaska, being the only state in the United States without an arts council, and putting seniors to the curb. And that gets you about a third of the way to the $3,000 PFD. It's basically Alaska at statehood level, 1959, if these vetoes go through. And how you get to a full $3,000 PFD with a balanced budget, you're looking at Alaska at 1869 sort of vintage level services. And the only thing good about Alaska in 1869 is the capital was in Sitka. So no offense to my Juneau colleagues. So that's my first point. The second point is these vetoes, which I very much look forward to overriding, highlight a fundamental conflict in the word of our governor. And they highlight a conflict between candidate Dunleavy and Governor Dunleavy. And I want to highlight two examples which are brought into light by the budget document we have before us. And the first is the ferry system, which a lot of us in Southeast are pretty familiar with, and the South Central Lucians, our Senate Majority Leader. It's not just a Southeast issue. And candidate Dunleavy, if I may quote, Madam President.
Permission granted.
In responding to a question about the ferry system, said, quote, "You can't eliminate the ferry system. That's how we get around." Another quote, "There's no plan to hack, cut, or destroy AMHS." Well, I think many of us are familiar when the budget proposal came out in February, the ferry system was to be shut down this fall and winter. Lights off, put the ships in dry dock, maybe scuttle them, I don't know, but no ferry system in coastal Alaska. So that's the action of Governor Dunleavy versus the word of candidate Dunleavy. And that's a reconciliation that I would love to see anybody make between those actions and those words. Fortunately, through conversation, and I have a lot of gratitude to my Senate colleague, some remedy was found, but the fact that actions and words are so far removed from each other is highly problematic to me. And this is really just a segue to one of the items that we will all be voting to consider override of shortly, which is on the University of Alaska. When candidate Dunleavy was asked about the University of Alaska and whether he plans to cut it, his answer was, and if I may quote, Madam President.
Permission granted.
No, for now. No plan to cut the University of Alaska. And this is I guess the charm candidacy that our governor enjoyed, because of course, one of the line item vetoes that we're considering today is a 41% cut to the University of Alaska, which is black and white opposition between word and action. So I look forward today to doing candidate Dunleavy a solid and allowing candidate Dunleavy's word to carry through and restore some of the campaign promises he made in the year 2018. So that fundamental gulf, failure to reconcile between words and actions, is very problematic to me, and we are seeing evidence of that in these budget vetoes today. The third point, and the final point I'd like to make, is there's been a lot of rhetoric in 2019 about the importance of following the law, particularly around the statutory formula of the permanent fund dividend. And I believe maybe even more than the average legislator that we as an institution should do our absolute best to align our actions with the letter of the law and the letter of the uniform rules in a way that I think might make the presiding officer of the House at times wondering where I'm sort of going with my little rabbit hole chases. But the Constitution controls all, and that's the bottom line. And while I deeply disagree with a lot of the governor's choices in these line item vetoes, he does have the constitutional authority to do it, and we have the constitutional authority to overwrite those vetoes. But it's the rhetoric that I find problematic, and the rhetoric is statutory PFD, statutory formula of the PFD carries all, it carries the day, and I think it's very important to note a hypocrisy that exists with these line item vetoes, in that there are multiple programs that also enjoy being enshrined into the letter of Alaska statute that are being vetoed, and therefore the law is being violated by that same rhetoric that is so often trotted out relating to the permanent fund dividend. School bond debt reimbursement. It's written into this law of Alaska. The line item vetoes the governor has just put forward violate that law. Community assistance, also written into the law of Alaska. The governor's vetoes violate that law. The senior benefit program, as pointed out earlier, also is enshrined in Alaska statute. The governor's line item vetoes violate that law. I recognize he has the constitutional authority to do all of this, but it is again, the gap or failure to reconcile between rhetoric and action and inconsistency in which he applies these governing principles that are identified that is deeply problematic to me. That is my third point. Right now in Alaska, I think about, if I were to guess, 75% of Alaskans support the action that we're about to take in overriding these vetoes. It is right, center, and left, rural and urban, by every sort of axis of diversity. I think there is broad support. I also recognize there's a portion of Alaska that supports the governor's vetoes, maybe 20, 25%. Next time an opinion poll comes out on the governor's approval, I suspect these numbers will probably be reflected in that. I'm very proud to be in the 75 or so % of Alaskans that support overriding these vetoes and support a reasonable, sustainable future for the state. And I'm troubled because there are legislators who are not here today to consider this discussion, to take this vote, who I believe represent districts that predominantly are a part of that 75%. And the people in those districts need to be represented, they need to be heard. And I'm very hopeful that if not today, in the coming days or the coming weeks, those people will be represented, and the 75% of Alaskans that I would say represent a common sense majority will ultimately carry the day. But for now, for everybody listening at home, as is said, it's going to be a long month. I'm hopeful that we can get to some resolution. But for now, I'm very proud to stand with all of you and with 75% of Alaskans, and look forward to casting a vote to override these vetoes.
Thank you, Representative Christ-Tompkins. Is there further debate? Representative Thompson.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, Mr. Speaker, I very seldom get up on the floor and speak during debate on issues, but these vetoes have prompted me to get up because I just can't believe what's happening to our state. I want to thank all of my colleagues in both bodies for their facts and figures. I don't want to repeat those. I want to thank them for their impassioned speeches, their stories of devastation that this will cause to people all over the state and every corner of the state. Everybody will be touched by these vetoes. We received letters from the Fairbanks Chamber of Commerce, the Anchorage Chamber of Commerce, the Juneau Chamber of Commerce, business organizations and bankers from all over the state telling us how much these vetoes are going to hurt the economy in our state. I just can't believe that we're headed in this direction. We all received thousands of emails. I got emails from France, scientists over there that said the university system in Alaska is the leader in climate change research. I received the same thing from Algeria, another email, saying that Alaska is the Arctic University. And with these reductions, it will no longer be the Arctic University. It will not be the important work that they do will go away. Those top scientists that have international and federal grants to do their research and their work on climate change and Arctic policy, they're going to take those grants and go to other places. We will no longer be the Arctic University and be important in this world as we are today. Those type of things just break my heart. I cannot believe what we are doing here with these vetoes that are here. I always make up my mind early on at the very start of how I'm going to vote, and I listen to debate. But I had to get up and speak to these today. And I want to point out to everybody how important it is. What was said within the last week by the Office of Management and Budget and by our governor, that this is phase one, that this gets us halfway there, that next year he intends to do the same amount again. And we have got to tell this governor that we cannot have this. We have to push back and say, enough is enough. I mean, we've got to take care of ourselves. We have got to be the body, of appropriating body, and stand up for what's right. And we've got to tell the governor we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Thompson. Representative Johnston.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I, too, was not going to speak today, but yesterday I received an email from our son, Ross, and it was a speech out of the wit and wisdom of Wally Hickel. And I hope all of us can think of many different wits and wisdoms of Wally Hickel and his quasi-essential Alaskan story. But some of you might not know that there's a very influential member of this administration who actually worked for Governor Hickel. And I would say probably was mentored at times by Governor Hickel. And I hope that person maybe would listen to these wits and wisdoms of Wally Hickel. It was a speech he gave in Sitka, Alaska in 1986. And the name of the speech, it's Time to Think Rich Again. And he was talking about a plaque that was on his wall. The author was Dag Hammarskjöld, maybe, something like that. Anyways, permission to read, Madam President.
Permission granted.
For all that has been, thanks. For all that will be, yes. For all that has been, thanks. Words that understand the battles, the wins, the losses. Words that express how grateful I am for the opportunity to be these battles and be part of a pioneering spirit that shaped a new state. For all that will be, yes. Words that recognize the obligation we all have to the future of Alaska. A future will contain new wins, new losses, but is a future of such hope and promise and excitement that the challenge is accepted with a full heart. We used to say, north to the future in this state, and believed every word of it. We were always trying to prove our potential. We thought big ideas. We were willing to put in the grunt work to make these ideas happen. We used to say, let's go. Now we say, give me. We used to say, north to the future. Now we ask, do we have a future? Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Representative Johnston. Senator Stevens.
Thank you, Madam President. It's a pleasure to be here. And I would say first that there are a lot of empty chairs here. And I've chosen to grab someone's table here and have a chance to speak to you. One nice thing about this is that there's a microphone available for the senators, at least. Normally, Madam President, I sit in the back of the room. We call it the grumpy old senators, so it's a pleasure to move up, to be here in the middle of the room. There's a lot I don't know, but I do know the university. And having retired after 25 years as a professor of history and humanities, I'm very concerned of the cuts the governor has taken. $130 million in state funding, 41% of state funding to the university has been cut. 1/3 of the cuts, of all the cuts that the governor has taken, are coming from the university. These are devastating. These are unprecedented. Undoubtedly, you will wind up with an enormous raising of tuition for my grandchildren, I am sure, and for anybody else's children and grandchildren in this room. Furlough notices have been sent out to 2,500 employees. Tuition will be raised, programs will be cut, faculty will be laid off. There have been already freezing and freezing of travel and hiring by the university. There's a clause called financial exigency. When I was at the university, that was always a scary thing to hear. That means that if things get so bad, tenured faculty have been let off. Having been a tenured faculty, a full faculty member, tenured faculty at the university, that would have scared me at the time. I should say that I have no conflict of interest. I retired some 20 years ago, have not had any contact with the university since then, except that I do know the importance of the university. Tremendous blow to the institution and to the reputation of our university. These damages are permanent, will be permanent if we allow this to pass. They are irreparable. The reach of the university severely impacts the education of our students, of our children, of our grandchildren. It's important that we recognize the research element of the university, the services the university provides to all of Alaska, and frankly, to beyond Alaska, to all of the country and to the world in Arctic issues. Very important research going on. It affects all of us. Even those who never step foot on a campus in Alaska will be affected by these cuts. According to the Anchorage Economic Development Corporation, University of Alaska provides $714 million directly every year, $402 million indirectly into our state economy. Those figures are from 2012. That's over $1 billion every year into our state economy. The businessmen of Alaska, the business community, relies on local talent from our university, from the graduates, for their workforce needs. 68% of two-year graduates and 42% of four-year graduates remain in our state. This 41% cut places all of these things at risk. It threatens the leadership of our university in serving the energy sector, the seafood sector, natural resources, health, transportation, education, all of those sectors of our Alaska economy. This at a time, Madam President, when we desperately needed nurses. We desperately need nurses and teachers in our state. Gutting higher education will not be an effective tool for recruiting bright, new talent into our state, or for recruiting industries into our state. Just the opposite. Just the opposite, Madam President. It is saying Alaska is not open for business. In conclusion, I simply want to thank all of those employees of the university, the faculty, the professors, all of the staff, all of the administrators throughout our state, not only in the three major institutions, but all of the extended sites. They may not be with us in a year, and they have done enormous service to this state. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Stevens. Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Madam President and Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. And I guess there's always one with a different opinion here. First of all, I'm also disappointed that everyone's not here. I think everybody should be here or in Wasilla. I really don't care where. I agree. It's kind of taken away from really what is going on. But I guess I look at this a little different, because what could we do today? We've been here for 2 hours having good discussion. It's a discussion I think we absolutely needed to have. But we can't override the vetoes without 45 votes. And even with my math skills, I'm pretty sure we can't get there if we don't have 45 people. But what we could do with 21 on one side and 11 on the other is that we could take these vetoes and we could go one by one through our finance committees, and we could talk about whether or not there's a better step-down approach. $130 million veto on the University of Alaska. We even know the University of Alaska has a plan with a step-down approach. But today to vote for a veto means giving all of it back, and even they have a plan that we can't utilize through this venue. But we could through an appropriation bill. We could be spending our time and looking at each and every one of them and say, is there statute that already deals with this? Senior benefits, a perfect example. And I think I've been one of the biggest spokesmen. If it's a statute and you don't like it, change it. Well, there was a bill. We didn't change it, not by accident, because there wasn't 21 on one side and 11 on the other side that believed that it should have been changed. So therefore, should that money be taken out? Something that could be vetted out that we would be able to do. Madam President, on February 13th, we got a budget. Knocked the wind out of most people. But that was just the beginning of the conversation. We then took it pretty much line by line through all of our subcommittees, and I also want to thank the co-chairs on the operating budget from both bodies, because that was pretty painful. That was long days, looking through each and every one of those, but we did, as a group, compromising as a group. I surely didn't get all my way, and I'm sure there's others who didn't get their way as well, but we came up with a document, and we sent it on its way. Now guess what? We got it back, and we're not really happy with it. Believe it or not, it's only a 10% cut, about 3.25 from us, and another 6.75 from the governor. But that's where we have the opportunity, Madam President, Mr. Speaker. It's an opportunity for compromise, and that's why we're here. I don't mean just here today because of the overrides, because of the dividend, because of other things we haven't dealt with yet, because at the end of the day, we only have two opportunities to compromise, and that is by having 45 of other legislators to decide if we're going to send a document to hold up those vetoes or compromising with the governor. So I guess my vote today for not voting to override these vetoes is in the hopes of that we will take each and every one of these seriously and look and say, maybe not this item, but maybe this one, or maybe a step down and having a goal of a 2 or 3 year plan. Because that's what compromise is at the end of the day. But my only option here right now is all or nothing. And I can't tell you that all 182 items are good or bad, because there's 182 items that we could be spending our time in looking at, which is our responsibility. And then when I heard, well, we'll just send it back and he'll just veto it again. Well, I don't know that. I think if you send it all back exactly the way it came, I think that's a pretty good guarantee. But what if we truly looked at each one of those and said, okay, not 130 million for the university, maybe only 20, 25, whatever that number is working with the university. What if with some of the other items, and it's kind of exactly what we do with the ferry system and looking at it. If we took too much out of it, it shut it down. If we did some step down, we'd be able to still keep the boats running and making sure that people have access to other parts. So I just want to make sure that, my constituents as well as other Alaskans, understand that there's always other options to be able to do. But right now, it's a numbers game. We don't have 45. So today we will vote, and it will fail, no matter what the numbers show up there. But I want to make sure Alaskans know the conversation's not over. I don't think there's anyone in this room that says, this is it, and we're not, and we're done. We're not done. We have other avenues to continue the discussion. But for me, a budget is all about a document of compromises. And we don't always get our way the first time, and sometimes not even the second time. But I'm willing to stay here and say, these are the things I can do, and I have the votes to be able to do that. Send it back on its way, see what happens, and we may have to do it all over again. But that's part of our responsibility as being appropriators here and doing what's best for each and every one of our regions. So although I don't support vetoing all of these items in total, I am 100% in a compromise, working together with everyone, coming up with a plan that works best for Alaskans. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wilson. Excuse me, Representative Wilson. Representative Knopp.
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Speaker, Madam President, like my colleague from Fairbanks, I didn't particularly care to get up and speak today because there's so much to talk about. And so for the public who's still at home listening, if they're expecting me to say something that hasn't been said, they're going to be sorely disappointed. There's been so much said, but I do want to touch on a couple things, mainly for the people in this room. The collective wisdom in this room, Madam President, is just incredible. We've been debating this for 7 months, and so the collective wisdom is incredible, but the speeches in themselves, very impassioned, very heartfelt. And the reason they're so good, Madam President, Mr. Speaker, is because they come from the heart. They weren't scripted for television. So kudos to everybody who talked from the heart, and I think everybody in the room did. The other thing I want to say, we get a lot of letters, emails from the public, phone calls, and they talk about compromise. Madam President, Mr. Speaker, you two know better than everybody in this room how much effort has been made towards compromise in the numerous phone calls, in the conversations we've had in caucuses, in the meetings, in finance. It's to no avail, Madam President. It takes two parties to compromise. One can't do it by themselves. The other thing I need to say is that this body, these members in this building, have been very gracious in delivering their criticism of the governor, and I believe rightfully earned, deserved, but they've been very gracious in that. So I need to speak to that a little bit. So locally, Madam President, is the fact that, I've been doing community service for 15, 16 years locally and now in the House. And so I've been on the peninsula for 40 years, maybe a little bit more. Same area, Kenai, Soldotna. And very, very much care about my community. That's the reason I do what I do. There's no other reason to do this, right? And I have no plans of going anywhere. So I care about the opportunities for them. I care about the economic opportunities. I care about the employment opportunities, the educational opportunities. So that's why we do what we do. And so when the governor first rolled out his budget, the initial budget, it was a $1.6 billion cut. And the reality of that budget is the fact that it wasn't a budget. It wasn't a plan. And when he talked about cut, there was cost shifting. There was about $700, $800 million in true proposed cuts, only come to find out that he couldn't fulfill them, and everything else was taken from municipalities and things that weren't rightfully belong to the state, belong to municipalities. So there was never a plan, Madam President, and I think that's the point I want to make. So in these vetoes, in this red line in this budget, there was no plan, Madam President, Mr. Speaker. Any child or any pet with a red pen could have done this. They were all arbitrary. There still is no plan. They're devastating to our communities and to every opportunity constituents have a right to. And so I think so. I'm proud to stand up here and override these vetoes. Vote yes to override them. But I do want to give the governor kudos for one thing. I've never seen any individual ever bring together a group collectively like he has in this body. We've got Democrats, Republicans, Independents, House and Senate, united. We've been united for 7 months. I want the public to know that there is no plan. There is no plan. The other thing I want the public to know, if we made every effort for compromise, it takes two parties to do that. And so, and the last thing I want the public to know, and the senator from Anchorage said it earlier, there simply is no deficit. We are not in a financial crisis in this state, and people need to get over that. You can fabricate one, but there simply is not one. We flat funded services, opportunities as we did prior years. We completely down from what we were just a few years ago. And so, past legislatures, Madam President, have been beat up terrible for spending down savings. We get crucified for spending down $15 billion in savings the last 4 years. But it was that same legislative body that had the foresight to save that money for just this time. Nobody saw the immediate crash of oil prices that got us where we are today. We were a little slower taking action. We've depleted the savings. We had to take action. That's what we've done. We've been beat up terrible from spending from savings. That's what this body, both bodies in this building today, had decided not to do. Not to spend from savings, not to spend more than we had. That's what we committed to do, and that's what we've done. We have a good, sound budget this year, Madam President. Unfortunately, it's not good enough for this governor, and I don't know what would be good enough for this governor. So. Glad to support the overrides and support the veto override. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Knopp. Representative Kopp.
Thank you, Madam President. Speaker Edgman, I rise in support of overriding the vetoes done by the administration to the operating budget, House Bill 39. Madam President, the member from District 19 earlier reminded us that July 4 we celebrated Independence Day as a country, and what that means to Alaskans. And I was thinking it is true that all Alaskans are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then I thought that whole Declaration of Independence that brought all those people together at that time was because they realized it was their right, it was their duty to fight for the future security of their state. And that is what we are doing here now. We are protecting the balance of powers, and we are pushing back and saying that we in fact must assent to the laws that protect the public welfare and good of the people of Alaska. And that was one of the reasons when the founders, those signers, gave a defense for why they would push off the tyranny of the king. They said that he is not assenting to good public laws that are there for the public good. Another one of those, Madam President, is because the King was calling the legislature to places distant that were uncomfortable for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. Madam President, I'll leave that there, but I'm going to go on and just remind the people of Alaska that this budget in front of us today and the vetoes we are now addressing is not about pursuing a balanced budget. It is about paying a $3,000 dividend check. Madam President, we know that the only way for this to have been possible was for a plethora of companion legislation to have been passed that would have forcibly confiscated the wealth of the North Slope Borough, the Kenai Borough, the Valdez Borough, and the Fairbanks Borough, and the shared petroleum property tax revenue they had with the state. The very communities that host the industries that put out the lifeblood of Alaska's economic engine. Madam President, this legislature also disagreed with the governor to go along with the forced confiscation of wealth from every community in Alaska that supports the commercial fishing industry and all those thousands of jobs that support the lifeblood of Alaska. One community in one fishing village in Alaska, Little Naknek, Alaska, needs a $10 million septic system. That is 8-9 times what they collect in a year in their local little tax base of 1,000 people. But every summer, they have 10,000 cannery workers and fishermen that use that septic system. They need an upgrade. Clawing back that shared fishery tax devastates those communities. They support these industries we depend on. Is that worth a $3,000 dividend? Madam Chair, is breaking faith with every voter who voted on a school bond debt proposition, knowing what the state share would be and what their personal share would be, and to have the state say, we're no longer paying our share, it's all on you, your property tax rate's going up. Madam Chair, is that worth, Madam President, is that worth a $3,000 PFD? Madam President, is forcing our university system to collapse and all the great pioneering research for Arctic climate, the contracts they have with the Department of Defense, technology applications, the science and engineering programs that directly translate to jobs in our economy, is that worth a $3,000 PFD? Madam Chair, is closing our medical school system to a state that has the most underserved healthcare population in the country, the most need of physicians and healthcare providers, is that worth a $3,000 PFD? Madam President, is forcing lifelong elderly Alaskans out of the pioneer home to move out of Alaska and live in places they have never known, is that worth a $3,000 PFD? Madam Chair, is taking hospice care from families with dying loved ones who are at the very end of their life and when they're in the most need of hospice assistance, is that worth a $3,000 PFD? Madam Chair, I would say that we would all agree that it is our duty here to seek justice and to do what is right, to defend the oppressed, and to take up the cause of the fatherless and to plead the case of the orphans. It's my intent to do that, and I believe it's the intent of the members of this body to do that today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Kopp. Is there further discussion? Seeing none. Are you ready for the question? That question being, shall conference committee substitute for sponsor substitute for House Bill 39 become law, notwithstanding the governor's vetoes? In summary, a vote yes is to override the vetoes. A vote no is to uphold or support the vetoes. Will the Secretary please call the roll of the Senate?
Senator Bishop?
Yes.
Bishop, yay. Senator Coghill?
Yes.
Coghill, yay. Senator Costello? Senator Gray Jackson?
Yes.
Gray Jackson, yay. Senator Hoffman?
Yes.
Hoffman, yay. Senator Hughes is excused. Senator Kawasaki?
Yes.
Kawasaki, yay. Senator Keel?
Yes.
Keel, yay. Senator Bichicki is excused. Senator Olson?
Yes.
Olson, yay. Senator Reinbold? Senator Schauer? Senator Stedman?
Yes.
Stedman, yay. Senator Stevens? Yes. Stevens, yay. Senator Von Imhoff.
Yes.
Von Imhoff, yay. Senator Wielechowski.
Yes.
Wielechowski, yay. Senator Wilson is excused. Senator Begich.
Yes.
Begich, yay. Senator Birch.
Yes.
Birch, yay. Senator Giesel.
Yes.
Giesel, yay.
Has every senator voted? The secretary will lock the roll. Does any senator wish to change their vote? The secretary will record and announce the vote.
14 yeas, 0 nays.
House members may proceed to vote. Will clerk please lock the roll? Does any member wish to change his or her vote? Will clerk please announce the vote?
23 yeas, 1 nay.
Will the secretary announce the combined vote of the joint session?
37 yeas, 1 nay.
And so, by a vote of 37 yeas and 1 nay, the measure to override the vetoes made in House Bill 39 has failed. At this time, we will take a 10-minute at ease. Will the joint session please come back to order? Mr. Senate Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam President. I move and ask unanimous consent that the vetoes in the Conference Committee substitute for House Bill 40 become law, notwithstanding the governor's vetoes.
So the motion before the joint session is whether House Bill 40, which is the mental health budget, become law, notwithstanding the governor's veto. Is there debate? Seeing none, are you ready for the question? The question being, shall the Conference Committee substitute for House Bill 40 become law, notwithstanding the governor's veto? Again, a yes vote means a desire to override the veto. A no vote means to uphold or support the vetoes. Mr. Speaker.
House members may proceed to vote. Will the clerk please lock the roll? Does any member wish to change his or her vote? Will the clerk please announce the vote?
23 yeas, 1 nay.
Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll of the Senate?
Senator Coghill.
Yes.
Coghill, yay. Senator Costello. Senator Gray Jackson. Gray Jackson, yay. Senator Hoffman.
Yes.
Hoffman, yay. Senator Hughes is excused. Senator Kawasaki.
Yes.
Kawasaki, yay. Senator Keel.
Yes.
Keel, yay. Senator Machicki is excused. Senator Olson.
Yes.
Olson, yay. Senator Reinbold. Senator Schauer. Senator Stedman.
Yes.
Stedman, yay. Senator Stevens.
Yes.
Stevens, yay. Senator Von Imhoff.
Yes.
Von Imhoff, yay. Senator Wielechowski.
Yes.
Wielechowski, yay. Senator Wilson is excused. Senator Begich.
Yes.
Begich, yay. Senator Birch.
Yes.
Birch, yay. Senator Bishop.
Yes.
Bishop, yay. Senator Giesel.
Yes.
Giesel, yay.
As every senator voted, the secretary will lock the roll. Does any senator wish to change their vote? The secretary will record and announce the vote.
14 yeas, 0 nays.
Will the secretary announce the combined vote of the joint session?
37 yeas, 1 nay.
And so by a vote of 37 yeas and 1 nay, the measure to override the vetoes made in House Bill 40 has failed. Mr. House Majority Leader, pardon me.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I move and ask unanimous consent that the joint session rescind its previous action on House Bill 39.
Mr. Senate Majority Leader.
Madam President, I move that the joint session stand in recess until 10:30 a.m. Thursday, July the 11th.
Seeing no objection, the joint session is in recess until 10:30 a.m. Thursday, July 11th.